unexpected.
Hey everyone, I'm so excited to mention that my new book, Live Well and Thrive, is now available online and in bookstores everywhere. In the book, you will not only find meal plans and recipes, but also the tools, research, and tips that you need to live a long and healthy life. As many regular listeners already know, I don't subscribe to any particular eating methodology or diet. Rather, it's been my long-term mission to teach people how to heal themselves through practical lifestyle modification practices. These include eating real food, sleeping well, moving daily, and creating a happiness horizon. You can find links to where you can purchase the book in the show notes. Today, I chat with one of my all-time favorite people, Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. In this episode, we discuss at length the mental and emotional origin of disease. Kirstin has evolved her practice to incorporating mind-body medicine and is seeing incredible results taking place in her patients. Dr. Kirstin's contact details are in the show notes if you'd like to get in contact with her. And please don't forget to rate and review the podcast on Apple or Spotify. It's the ratings that get the information out to a wider audience. Enjoy.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Reinvent Health podcast. Here we get to chat to some of the world's most interesting and influential people about everything to do with physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. If you want to make healthy changes and live a better life, you are in the right place. Please don't forget to rate, leave a review, and share with everyone who wants to live their best life. And now your host, Nikki Robertson.
So, Kirstin, thank you so much for joining me yet again on the Reinvent Health podcast. We're recording in December 2022. This will be the first episode of January 2023, and it is episode 80. So I'm really excited that you're joining me on the show because we're going to kick off with a subject that I absolutely love, something very close to my heart and something you're passionate about, which is, I guess you could call it psychosomatic medicine or understanding the mind states that bring about disease or our inability to really recover fully from disease. It's not to say that disease is in the mind, but the way we think about things and our attitude to life and how we view our reality, our model of reality, our map of reality really dictates how efficiently our immune systems can cope when we're faced with stress and disease and viruses. So I'm going to hand over to you, and if you can take us through who you are, what your background is, and what you're passionate about, and then we'll launch straight in.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me again back on the podcast. I'm so excited to be here today. My name is Dr. Kirstin Lauritzen. My training started as a doctor of chiropractic, and along the way, I actually picked up a couple of different techniques. One was called neuroemotional technique, and one was called applied kinesiology. They are really NET is a branch off of applied kinesiology, which is essentially where a muscle testing first began. So a lot of people know a lot of different of the offsets of it. But the reason why I mention it is because even in that technique, that was my first exposure to emotions and working with emotions in the physical body and seeing how somebody would maybe come in with shoulder pain. And I would start looking at all of the different muscles of the shoulder. And let's say it was, what's a good example? The pec muscles, pec sternal, pec clavicular. There's two different branches of your pectoralis muscle on your chest. And there's a couple different things you can test for that. So we can look at, it's on the same meridian or same connection with the liver. And the liver then also has emotions that are usually somewhere around resentment or frustration or anger of some type. And so what you can start doing is you can start looking at, okay, so if the shoulder pain is being caused by this pectoralis muscle, it could be something going on with maybe liver enzymes are off. It could be a nutritional aspect that's not correct, or something's weird going on with that. Maybe they need some more antioxidants and the liver's not detoxing properly. Or maybe there's something going on emotionally. And it was always so interesting to me, because if it tested for emotions, I would ask them, I'd be like, hey, like, what's going on? Is there anything happening right now that's making you frustrated or angry or resentful? And their faces would just shift as if somebody finally was like seeing them, for the first time and actually acknowledging their experience. And that was so powerful, and then I had a couple of tools in order to be able to help them work through that. And sometimes even just having the conversation itself was really just what they needed. And they would be amazed by how differently their shoulder would feel, afterwards. So that's really where I started getting into looking at the psychosomatic aspect of emotions and the physical body and pain and chronic illness and disease. And then at the same time, I went and I got my master's in human nutrition and functional medicine. And functional medicine also wants to, they also suggest, looking into as a part of it, the mindset, the emotional, the spiritual, all of these play a role many times in disease and in why we stay sick. So I did that for 5 or 6 years in practice, working with people, combining chiropractic, combining functional medicine, and leading up to this year, I'm going to share this as a personal note, just because I think it's so helpful, our personal stories. I was so frustrated in my life, in my business. I was just constantly feeling like nothing was the way I wanted it to go, and it just, everything I would do just felt like it would fall flat. And it just led to me feeling like I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know why I was doing what I was doing, and just ultimately just so frustrated. And not to mention, I also was dealing with health stuff, kind of as a result of a lot of it too, right? At the same time, I was training for Ironmans, which is like super stressful, So like, you can kind of picture that person, right? It's just that's really not achieving what they want. They're not becoming the person that they want. And here's the thing. Also, I know what it's like because you start collecting all of these things. You collect the supplements, you collect the next course, the next protocols, the next physicians, and you just go and you go and you go. You're reading more books, and it's just like this. Your bank account feels it, first off, and second, like you also feel like there's no way forward. I must be missing something. There's like, this is where I was at. So I came across 2 amazing practitioners. The business is with Zesty Ginger, but Dr. Alex and Megan, they helped me get certified in neurolinguistic programming. And that's where so many things opened up for me, where we really started looking at, and I started learning at the emotional and the physical and the beliefs and the mental aspects of really how we get into our disease states, and really how we end up in creating these lives that get us here. So that's a big intro, and we can start diving into all the things, but that's really how I got here and who I am and how I'm trained. So now I do all of those things except for the chiropractic.
That's not surprising, because you start with something and it evolves.
It does.
That's the way life works. So just because, as you were talking, I was taking some notes, and when you were talking about meridians and energy centers in the body and the way that we think of where we store emotion, this has been, Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. This is how medicine began. This is the origins of medicine, is knowing, where we store. I mean, it's not uncommon for a Chinese medicine practitioner so you have an angry liver or you have a hot liver. And, I've often said to people who I've interacted with, when they say, oh, no, they've got a knee problem. It's like, well, what's making you angry? And they like look at you like, well, since you asked. And there's this list of things. So there's definitely, it's not woo for sure. There's definitely a lot of credibility in this thinking. So Let's just go back one more step. And I'd like to unpack really what kinesiology is, because people have asked me, what is kinesiology and muscle testing? And I'm not trained in kinesiology. I've done it. I've experienced it for myself, but it's not something I've ever been able to articulate. So how does kinesiology work?
Yeah. So I'm trained in kinesiology. Applied kinesiology is like where it all began. And then as I mentioned, there's a lot of offshoots that come out of that. Kinesiology is really looking at how the physical body is functioning, but it is from a functional standpoint, right? So it still is kind of rooted in that whole system, that whole body approach in many ways. But when we're looking at, let's say, a joint, or let's just take a joint as an example. There are a lot of muscles.
Yeah.
There's a lot of blood supply. There's a lot of nerves. There's also the bones. There's these ligaments and tendons. And so just that alone, kinesiology is kind of just looking at the movement of the joint. How is it functioning from a movement perspective?
Right.
And then it's also thinking about what else can be innervating, what else can be feeding this joint, what else is connected to this joint. So what applied kinesiology basically does is it says, okay, this could be a muscular thing. This could be a joint thing. This could be a tendon ligament thing. This could be something else connected to an organ system. This could be something else connected to an emotion. It could be a nutrition imbalance. It could be a movement issue, in muscles specifically. It could be that we've torn a muscle. It could be that, now we have multiple muscles around the joint that are not communicating well to the brain because maybe there's something that's interfering at the level of the spine, right? So if there's been a bunch of tightness or movement right around the joints itself, it could make it a little bit harder for that nerve to communicate to those muscles. And so the brain, in some ways, it's not weak in a sense, but it's off. It's not communicating well. There's interference somewhere. So a lot of people experience pain when that happens because the brain is like, I don't really know where to map this thing. It happens also in a very common way that people will experience this as well, is like with ankle injuries. If you've ever sprained an ankle or anything like that, people will often notice that they get more and more ankle injuries, or they feel like they just don't really have stability in that ankle. And part of it can be because the ligaments and the tendons were stretched out, there's a lack of stability in that physical way. There's also then what can happen is because the brain experiences this trauma in this joint, it doesn't have spatial awareness for where it's at. And so this is usually where rehabilitation comes in. A lot of those exercises are about reconnecting those patterns to the brain, the movement patterns, and giving it back that spatial awareness. And anyway, so applied kinesiology uses muscle testing of the specific muscles to see what's going on with that particular body, and then starts asking questions about where, why, what, how, what else is going on here that we are unaware of. So then what you saw is this evolution. Now people are exposed to muscle testing that's like an arm pull down test, which can be helpful. For me, I personally say, because I'm trained in the way that it first began, I always say we can get information that way. And there are a lot of physicians I've seen that do a lot of different techniques based off of it, that have the arm pull down test as a part of it. But I always take it back, like what's going on. I just want to double check, does this make sense based off of what I know as far as applied kinesiology goes.
So that makes a lot of sense. So that combined with your chiropractics and then the functional medicine and now the NLP, it opens up a whole new world. And yes, functional medicine is based very much in the mind-body connection and the timeline, the trauma timeline, the health timeline, because as we know, trauma lives in the body. That's nothing new. And the time point along a person's lifeline and those points of trauma very much affect the way they function in the world, or our map of reality, as we say in NLP. So take us through your NLP journey and what it brought out for you, because it is very personal for the person going through and learning it, and then how you're applying it in your practice.
So for me, as I mentioned already, just being so frustrated is kind of how I got there. But then what I started unraveling and realizing as I've been clearing out, those negative emotions, those beliefs that have been ingrained since I was a kiddo, or even potentially passed down beforehand. I started realizing that I have been pursuing the physical aspect of chronic illness for so long. The physical part, right? So like I had endometriosis starting when I was about 13, 14. Then that led to, after a series of things of taking some antibiotics and stuff for acne, I ended up taking birth control because at the time that was all that we could do. I'm saying quotations mark for those of you who are listening, but that's all we can do is put you on birth control for this. And then that ended up leading to me getting migraines. And I really suffered with those for my entire 20s. And the thing that I realized, and that was part of why I got into all the physical stuff, that's why I got into chiropractic, that's why I got into functional medicine and really looking into what do I need to do to heal, But as I've been going through this journey through neurolinguistic programming and just starting to really unravel some of the layers and the pieces of how I even got there in the first place, that has created such a impact on my physical body experience, because I started realizing that, as a kid, I loved to play sports, but the sports that I was in, I didn't really want to be playing. So like every single day I'd be like, I just like to stay home, or if I could just break my arm, then I wouldn't have to play for the rest of the season. We laugh, but it's pretty funny. But like there are people right now who are saying that too. Like, oh, if I could just get sick, then I'd have a week off, I'd have my break. I could take time off from work. If I could just, have this one thing happen, then this would happen, right?
Yeah.
And when we are saying yes, when we may no, when we are constantly putting others in front of, ahead of ourselves, and our wants and our needs, when we're constantly in this place where we feel like we're not doing what we want to be doing, what we should be doing, and we're also kind of falling back on the comfortable. But the comfortable is really continuing to drive a lot of those frustrations and a lot of the things that is really feeling like they're holding us back from being able to move forward. That has a very significant impact on how the brain, how the body communicates and what we end up creating out of that. And so the NLP journey for me has really been unraveling where and why that endometriosis started in the first place, really what triggered that, and learning more about, the inner child work and all this other stuff that exists out there in this space that is so impactful when you finally are able to give that kiddo this ability to say, hey, we're very egocentric when we're kids. We're like, well, it must be my fault because I'm not getting what I need or what I want. And that's where we create these beliefs. And that's ultimately then what can then get expressed in the body as certain types of conditions, pains, diseases, or I would say even like anxiety. Well, I guess it's considered potentially an illness anyway, but anxiety, depression, all of those mental health things as well. This is part of where all of that comes from. And so that's what my journey has been like, is really exploring a lot of those different aspects and seeing how it's opened up for me, something really cool. But then also for my people I work with, both, I guess you could say general population as well as my athletes, looking at that mindset performance piece has been so impactful at opening up doors for them through that layer as well.
If you're used to practicing in a certain way, and now you're looking at your patients from a completely different lens, it changes the way you treat people. So how has that been taken up? Have your patients noticed that you're asking them different questions, that you are, digging into other topics where they wouldn't expect that from you? Have you found that yet?
Yeah, a lot of it. I think I think because I had the applied kinesiology and the neuroemotional technique and some of those other things, I think a lot of my patients already kind of knew, and so they had already sort of experienced some level of that connection in a way. But they did notice as I started shifting a lot of my practice, they would even ask me questions. They'd be like, "Hey, what are you up to?" Like, "What are you doing?" Or, they'd even look at me too. And I would say, "Hey, I'm just kind of getting this sense that there's something else here." And I'd start asking questions and, within minutes, they'd, potentially be in tears because they were finally being able to release and communicate something that they had been holding on to for so long. And it started to make so much more sense why we kept hitting so many walls, because at that point, their brain and their body was like, we can't really integrate these supplements anymore. We can't really do any of these things until we start to embrace the parts, the fragmentations, and eventually come to that wholeness place. So that is really how it shifted so much for my patients. And they've even witnessed me. I just in the last month, stopped practicing chiropractic. It turns out that was a great thing for me to get started with, but it was such a source of frustration for me. And it turns out it really wasn't in alignment with really what I was kind of designed to do and how I was supposed to work with people. And so I finally said, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. And that took a whole thing, of beliefs to work on. Like, how can I not be practicing something that I got into so much student debt over, and spent 4 years earning this degree and all of this stuff. How can I not be practicing that anymore? And there's so many beliefs, so many things. Like, what do I do with my patients? How I want to make sure they're taken care of. Like, I don't want to leave them, and anyway, I had to face all of those things. And finally, I've made that shift. And so many of them have asked me, they're like, what are you doing now? What are you up to? And it's been such a great example of how we can shift and we can change and we can create what we want. Part of it is just really looking at what's holding us back from that.
Yeah, I love that you're brave enough to do what you've done, because I really believe that in this industry, you are meant to evolve your practice. You're meant to grow through what you've learned and use it maybe as a springboard for the next phase. Yeah. But if you really believe you can't add value to your patient's life doing what you're doing, and you do know what you can do to add value and help them, then it is our responsibility to do that, even if it means letting go of, doesn't matter. It's never a waste. It's always just part of the foundation of who you are as a practitioner. So, but it is brave. It's very brave. And congratulations. I think it's really, really amazing to be able to take a step like that. And then just based on what you said a little bit earlier, when a patient sees a doctor, whether it be a chiropractor or a functional medicine practitioner, we go to a doctor expecting answers. So we go, we get a diagnosis, we get tests done, we get supplements. So we expect it's kind of a one-way street of communication, almost I'd say more heavily weighted on the expertise of the physician. But when you bring NLP into the mix, you step back and you let the patient actually come up with their answers for themselves, which you're there to hold a space, but you're not there to give them the answer. And it's tricky because one always wants to jump in and offer advice and offer your perspective, but it's kind of not allowed in NLP. We're not allowed to put ourselves on that person. We have to get them to be creative and start imagining for themselves what will work for them. And that is so powerful because it's empowering. It gives a person a real understanding of why they are where they are at this present time. And have you found, I think it's the best way to describe it is getting your brain in a different gear where you've got to just hold a space for somebody. How has that worked, in your interaction with patients?
Holding the space is everything. The one thing I say, and I actually give this to a lot of my patients as a metaphor, But I want you to picture two people, one person's in a boat, the other person's in the water, right? They're in their stuff. They're dealing with things. They're trying to find answers. I have two things on this. They're in the water dealing with their stuff. Sometimes I think even without the NLP side of things, I felt like sometimes I would end up in the water with them, because they would be expecting answers. They would be expecting all of these things, and it makes sense, right? They're paying me to get better. So that was part of the transaction of it all. But what I started realizing though, is that when you have someone that can stay in that boat and hold the space for that person, we now have a lot of options. We can, row over to them. We can offer them a hand. We can send them a rope. We can send them a life jacket. We can do all these things. We can pass an oar out to them, right? We can do so many things when we're in the boat and holding that space for that person. But if we end up in that water with that person, now that gets really challenging. And the thing is that this is really what's happening in relationships. This is what's happening with, parenting kiddos, because every time we get triggered by something that's something we have not yet dealt with in our own past history, something we're still processing or learning, those triggering things that people can say can take us both into the water. And now, here we are. So when I'm talking to my patients about why this is so important, I explain, and I do my best to explain this, but part of it is really about understanding that we have that personal responsibility for our experience all the time. We get to choose how we respond. We get to choose how we interact with other people. We get to choose how we allow for things to even trigger our sympathetic nervous system, that response that we get. So being able to come from a bit more of a curious standpoint of like, that person just said something in a way that didn't feel very good, maybe I need to either maybe that was something that was inappropriate. And now this emotion is telling me that they've crossed a boundary, or, something is just not right here. Or maybe they just said something in a way that triggered me that wasn't necessarily about what they said. It's about something entirely different. And it gives so much more space for everyone to kind of own their own experience.
Yeah. And we don't put our model of reality on somebody else.
Exactly. The other part of that too, I think, especially with the patient and the doctor experience as well, is that, as I mentioned, with sort of that protocol and that physician and the nutrition and the supplements and all of that collecting that we do, one of the things that this also does really well is that a lot of the times people already know what they need.
So true.
They already have so much of the information that they know what they need, but they don't see it that way.
Sure.
It's the same thing as me in the business world that was like, oh, I need to collect this new thing because maybe I need to be running Facebook ads, right? Or maybe the reason why none of this is working is because of my messaging, right? And maybe the reason why none of this feels like it's working is because of this and this and this. And so, you just collect all of this stuff. And I don't know about you, but when people learn that I work in health in some way, they come up to me all the time and they're like, hey, what do you think about this doctor? Or like, hey, what do you think about this supplement? And it just is all these questions. And I just take a step back and I look at them, and I can see that they're looking for those answers. Sure. They're looking for that thing that's going to be that next thing that's going to help them. And what NLP really does, as you mentioned, is just being able, and many techniques like it, help the practitioner to work more as a guide for the patient and for that person. Right. What do they need? And what does their brain already know they need? But they're just not listening to that. And that is what changes everything.
Exactly.
Because now it's not about me. It's not about what I think. It's not about what I, am guessing would be my best knowledgeable guess, educated guess. Instead we get to say, well, what actually does this person need? And they are the ones that are going to know the best.
Yeah. I was thinking along the lines of something very similar this week, where you know your body better than anybody. knows your body. No one knows how you're feeling at 2:00 in the morning. You can do every blood test you like. It's not going to give you that answer. And to give permission to people to, really tap in to what they know is so powerful, because then they can own their healing process. Which is the antithesis of how we've been taught. We've always given power away, whether it be to the politician, the doctor, the teacher. To own your own health is critically important moving forward, I think. And the more practitioners, doctors, physicians who have an interest in understanding that, the better off we're all going to be. But it's going to be a long road to get till maybe it'll never happen. But one at a time. So let's dive into how disease state is influenced by stress and by negative perception, and how disease is influenced by mind state. What actually happens on a physical level that disrupts our immune system or creates inflammation?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of different layers to this, as I have at least, explored. And so one of the let's start with this. There was a recent research article that came out looking at the immunological effects of shame and guilt. And they didn't find that guilt necessarily drove up cortisol or anything like that, but they did find something very interesting about shame. What they found is that it increased the pro-inflammatory cytokines in the body when there was this induced sense of like self-blame or shame. And that's really important, because that means that like when we experience some of these different negative emotions, if we don't have a way to process them out of the body, they can get stored in the body.
Yeah.
If we think about anxiety, if we think about anger, if we think about sadness, if you ask somebody, like, when you get nervous, where do you feel it in your body? When you get anxious, where do you feel it? Yeah. People will tell you they feel it in their chest, or they feel it in their gut, or they feel it somewhere in their body. Sadness, same thing. Many people who experience depression will also experience very heavy fatigue, and their body just can like ache really badly. Yeah. I think this is a really key piece of how the physical body reacts to our emotions, because every single neurotransmitter bathes every cell in our body whenever we experience them. So, these hormones, these neurotransmitters, they're communicating with every single cell. So for us to kind of, I think, neglect the fact that like emotions, beliefs are really just thought habits, right? So if we are continuing to experience this emotion, it's likely coming because of a habit that we're thinking over and over and over again that really is a belief. So that is, I think, in one way, part of how the physical body can be affected by that. Now, we also think too, just working from the gut perspective of what I do a lot of, right? And we're looking at how the immune system is, so much of the immune system is at the level of the GI tract. And when you think about anxiety, when you think about worry and nervousness, and or even I'd say on the slower side too, that slowed down motility. Sometimes looking at that too is maybe we're looking at depression, maybe we're looking at something else that just sort of slows the whole body down. Both of those experiences, if we're not dealing with those emotions, we can put them on a supplement or something to get that gut moving, or to clear that gut out, or to work on the bacteria that's there. But if they're continuing to store emotions and they don't have a way to get them out of the body, the GI tract can continue to kind of suffer in that sense, because we also have the same neurotransmitters in the gut as we do in the brain. So for us to kind of think that like it's disconnected, I think is a bit lost in our guidance,
Very much so. But even if
function.
Yeah, if you just think about it, when you're nervous, you want to throw up sometimes.
Yes. And it's almost immediate.
Yeah, it is, it's completely wired in to the physical. And I mean, I actually came across, it wasn't a study, it was more of an observation, how in companies that look after their staff, where their staff are happy and the staff are feeling heard, they have something up to 80% less sick leave. And that's just a state of feeling like they belong. It's a sense of caring that changes sick leave. Whether that sick leave is real or not, people aren't getting ill. And that is such an incredible, just pure data reflection of just some changes in some organizations where they put their staff first, makes an enormous difference on the health of those people. And we know this, we talk about it, a lot of us really understand it, but many people cannot see a way to implement it. And I think perhaps that's really, perhaps your calling, going forward, is how do we practically understand what we're doing to ourselves and change that? Because the change is the tough part. So from an NLP perspective, we're sitting and we are talking to people and we're getting them to unpack things that they really didn't expect to unpack, perhaps. And this starts changing. Our brains are plastic. Our brains are able to change when we ask different questions, which is really powerful and really exciting, that we can change the way we see the world, the way we think of the world, the way we think of ourselves, when we start asking different questions, or when somebody can elicit from us these sorts of different thoughts. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. It just sort of went off on a tangent.
Oh no, I love it. I would even add to that too, if you don't mind. Just as you mentioned, so every time that we, a lot of these beliefs, a lot of these ways that we experience, emotions due to different triggers, different things that come up in our life that just funnel right into that, right? These are neurological pathways. I mean, if you know a little bit about, just for your listeners, about how the brain communicates, we have axons and we have, everything is connecting. These cells are all connecting. And what happens when we learn something is it creates this really nice pathway that it communicates really well. It's how we get better and better and more skilled at things, as those pathways continue to fire over and over and over again. And therefore then we now have a skill. Now, also then, though, what can happen when I talked about those thought habits is that if we're continuing to choose and we're continuing to see things in that way, we build these pathways that are like autobahns. They're like major highways that are constantly fired, in this pattern. So what some of this, work can do is it can start to break down those patterns and create put footpaths into what we do want. This other side of I don't really want to be feeling that way anymore. I really don't want to think that way anymore, because I can see how it's not helping me. And we can start to create a footpath of what we do want. Now, then though, then you need to have the steps that will help you to build into that too. I think a really big piece of this is understanding that we get to choose in any given time and take that personal responsibility, that it is up to us. And that's where I think sometimes people feel like they're powerless, is that they don't know that they can choose. And they also maybe don't even think that by their choice, that's powerful enough to create that change. And when you start to witness it and experience it, it really is impressive, how much that brain is plastic and how much you can choose something different. And that's, and I think that's where you start to see people, even without necessarily NLP per se, but you just see people, they're like, I'm just not going to do this again. I'm not going through this again. I'm not going to do XYZ. This isn't serving me anymore. And they choose something different at that time. That's how powerful some of these neurotransmitters are. I mean, they really can create that change. Just sometimes it takes that level of suffering and frustration for us to really get to that point where we're like, I don't want this anymore. I want something different.
That's exactly. You have to get really into the basement of the basement before you realize you can't do it. It doesn't take just stubbing your toe to realize you can change. It's got to be kind of a deep experience of time. Unfortunately, I think that's just the way the human brain is. But what you said about people don't realize they have the power is so true and so scary, because we all have the power to choose our next response. That is an absolute fact. And many, many people don't believe that, or they've never experienced that, which is, it's a little disconcerting and a little sad, but I guess that's just the human condition.
I mean, we're all here to learn and grow, right? Like that's our whole purpose here on Earth, is to just kind of figure it out as we go, So I think it is a little maybe disconcerting, but I think it's also just how we're meant to live. Yes. It's life, it's all of those ups and downs.
It's building mental muscle. I think, you've got to train your brain in a different way to get a different result. Otherwise, you're going to stay the same. It sounds so obvious, but perhaps hopefully to people listening, it's not that obvious. Hopefully we are reaching people where they go, you know what, I can change. I can think differently. I can do this differently. But my question is, what about people, and we see this a lot, who, every situation is serving us on some level. Okay, even the most negative situation. So when somebody identifies with their disease, they call it my cancer or my endometriosis. That is, for me, a hell of a red flag. And that is to not identify with the disease is personally one of the first and most important steps of overcoming a disease. It is an experience of cancer that you're passing through, not owning it. So, NLP, being neuro-linguistic programming, is the language it's the talk. It's our own inner dialogue that we are teaching our brain to believe. And when we own our disease and we call it ours, the body believes that and it holds on to it. So, you tell people that they are associating too much, or you sort of intimate that they are identifying too strongly with their disease state. And most people go, oh, no, I'm not. So how do we get one to rethink that and relook at it? And I suppose you've got to look at why you're in a comfortable, or an uncomfortable comfort zone to begin with. I think that's really the hard work. What are your thoughts around that?
Mm-hmm. I think in the beginning, before I had any of this stuff, the people who I really struggled with any of the protocols and the supplements and all of that, were the ones who had an identity that was tied to what they had in some way. And the thing that I look at there is, first off, what is this particular condition giving them? Like what gap is it filling? Is it that it gives them, that they learn along the way that, like, if they are sick, they get attention, they get belonging, they get connection. Is it something else? Is it that, this allows them to take that break. This is that nervous system that's like, oh, well, I learned two things. Either I can get injured or I can get sick, and then I get what I want, right? Like I get to take a break when one of these two things happens. And you see that a lot with athletes as well, by the way. If you look at like a pro season, and you'll hear this amongst some of the NFL players, so football in America, they have such significant stressful seasons, and not, like, this is football, but some people that don't play sports have significantly stressful lives. So, and you'll hear it and they'll say like, well, we just didn't get a break. And then I got injured, and you know what? It was really nice because I got a week off, or I got some time off in the middle of this insanely stressful period, right? The brain, the nervous system learns these patterns. So I think the reason why people tend to sometimes identify with the things that they have is because they've had it for so long that they either believe like it's never going away, and or they have this learned pattern that this is how I get what I need or what I want. So both sides of that.
Wow. And yeah, I guess this all starts, in childhood again.
Yeah, it's that inner child.
Yeah, it's where we start laying down habits and patterns. If you got a tummy ache, you're not going to school. It can be as simple as that.
Sure. And then the other side of that too, though, and I'll share this from my personal experience, is that through certain, let's say, just situations with parents. Also, not my childhood. My parents are great, but everybody has things that we learn and things we deal with when we're growing up, and our parents have they're doing the same thing. They are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. But something that I learned is that I had dissociated a lot as a kid. And then that ended up leading to me not feeling safe inside of my own body.
Yes.
So then I got the endometriosis, then I got the migraines, then I got the gut stuff, then I got the right? It goes on and on and on. But this is also coming from a kid that got attention. In a way, it was praised when you did well, when you got really good grades, you did all these things. So, I was a kid that was in sports. I was a kid that played piano and just wanted to just do that. And I played piano at a very, very high level. I also, was at a private school, and then I had 2 sets of friends.
Yep.
So if you look at this particular young adult or young kiddo that's like growing up and learning like, oh, well, if I am so busy all the time and if I am accomplishing all of these things, this is how I get that connection. Now you also look at me at this point and I have 5 degrees. Right? There's no question why I'm here now, right? But at the same time though, when we're looking at how people identify with the things that they have, part of it really has to do with that kid that was learning how to get what they needed, how to get that attention, how to get what they want, and trying to manage also the emotional state around them too. So when we dissociate and we try to just remove ourselves from our body entirely, part of what we have to do is bring that person back into feeling safe inside their own body. And that's where all the power is.
Yes.
That's where the medications start working again. That's where the supplements start working again. The nutrition interventions start working again. That's the place where we can start integrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And what you said about feeling safe is absolutely I'm not going to say anyone with endometriosis because there'll always be the outlier, but many, many women who you speak to with endometriosis and you ask them, do they feel safe? I haven't met one yet who says they do, that they've had, and it's always started in mid-teens, sort of age 15 onwards, 15, 16, where they started feeling unsafe in their body, that they had no power. And it's a hell of a thing to put back together, but it seems such a common thread. So yeah, it's also really inspiring that you can, dig down to such powerful causality and start working from there. And then, yes, it's not just a case of you change your mind and your body changes. It happens, but that's when, like you say, the medication can begin to really work, where the interventions can do better because we're breaking through that perception. And then healing can happen. It's quite remarkable. Right. It never fails to amaze me. I'm always
I know.
absolutely blown away.
I know. It's just so cool. It makes me so excited to see it when people commit and they get it. They say like, I need that. Like that is very clearly something that I'm missing. And when they are willing to say and to take and have the courage to say, okay, I know that I need this, and this is how I figure this all out. Like that is an incredible. It's a very humbling, also, but honoring experience to walk people with people on that journey. It's just
so cool,
incredible,
so cool. So we are coming up to the hour. I don't know where that's gone. I mean, it just disappeared into the quantum realm somewhere. So we'll have to pick up this conversation again in a couple of weeks because I'd really like to chat to you about NLP and athletes because such a natural fit, and getting your head in the right space for sport, and, getting your head body into the right level of attunement and coherence is also really powerful for performance. So love to chat to you further about that in a couple of weeks if you can.
Sounds great. I would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And then for anybody listening, of course, we'll put your links in the show notes, and please keep posting on Instagram. I've been missing your amazing posts. So keep going. They're always so cool to see and to interact with. So have a great day further, and we'll no doubt chat soon.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you once again for joining me for another episode of the Reinvent Health podcast. As usual, all of my guests' details can be found in the show notes page on Apple Podcast, Anchor, or wherever else you listen to your podcasts. Please don't forget to rate on Apple and leave a review.